Greetings, friends. Today's talk is on a very important sutta, but I guess I would say that every sutta the Buddha ever presented were important. Um, this does speak to a very common problem, common during the Buddhist time, common during our time. Um, I don't know that I'd say it's more common today, but through my direct experience, it's something that I see very, very often. The Agati Sutta, the subtitle is "Not Losing the Way," meaning losing the path that the Buddha taught. And again, just the language here shows how distraction and views rooted in ignorance continually to draw a sincere desire to awaken, to continue to draw away from that through four similar but separate issues. Again, common during the Buddhist time, common during our time. I see it so often to people that have. I've been teaching the Dhamma now for about 8 or 9 years. And for the last 4 or 5 years, that's been 3 classes a week. Before that, it was 1 or 2. But so many classes, there's been many students, or maybe I should classify them as people interested in meditation and mindfulness. And many of those have expressed an interest once they realized what I was teaching. But as they continued practice, they became distracted by other modern practices, or simply became uncomfortable with the self-searching that's primary to developing a Dhamma. So there's many more people that I taught, and perhaps it's the way that I teach. But I try to model my teaching after the example of how the Buddha taught. But anyway, the point is that there's many more people that have come to Crossover Meditation Center, heard the Dhamma, heard the way that I teach, and some have stayed for a while and then left. Some have come in and out and then left. And then there's a core group of people that have stayed and have made remarkable changes by avoiding the pitfalls and not losing the way. So let me read the Buddha's words on this. Now remember, the Buddha is teaching. If they're listening to the Buddha, they're interested in what he has to say. That's just common sense. But he's also recognizing the same thing that I have, that people that have a sincere desire to understand still lose the way. In other words, it's not just desire to awaken, to understand the 3 marks of existence that continues our Dhamma practice. If we don't incorporate the path, again, the Agati Sutta means not losing the way or not losing the path. If we don't incorporate the Eightfold Path, which is the only path the Buddha ever taught towards awakening, we are likely going to lose our way. And even if we don't lose our way, we'll just be dabbling in what the Buddha taught rather than actually developing it. That the Buddha taught a very specific path that has 8 factors, and each one of those factors must be incorporated in the way that the Buddha taught if we're going to awaken. And this talk today, I'm presenting it today because it follows after a talk that I gave last night on the Maghavibhanga Sutta, which is the sutta where the Buddha analyzes the Eightfold Path. And he explains very clearly what it is, and also directly and by inference what it is not. So the simplicity of the path allows us to develop awakening, but because our minds are distracted through the need for sensory stimulation, and I'll say that in a general way, we find that the Eightfold Path is lacking because we want the Eightfold Path. We want a path that an awakened human being taught to be more than it is, and to allow us to continue living within wrong views ignorant of Four Noble Truths. Let me read the sutta and I'll comment as I go along. The Buddha's words in the Agati Sutta: there are 4 ways of losing the way. One can lose the way through desire, through aversion, through delusion, and through fear. And that last reference, through fear, is ultimately a fear of annihilation. Of, if I let go of all my wrong views that I've used to establish myself, which is how the Buddha described anatta, these views are not a self, let go of the views. There's great fear in that. And a lot of that fear is a lack of trust that a human being actually did what he's teaching others to do, and trusting in the Dhamma and taking refuge. And so we take refuge in the Buddha, that an awakened human being actually awakened. We take refuge in his Dhamma that's still extant today, still present. And we take refuge in a well-focused Sangha if we're fortunate enough to find a Sangha, excuse me, that is actually well-focused on the Buddha's teaching, meaning a Sangha that hasn't done what the Buddha is describing here, a Sangha itself that hasn't lost its way. The Buddha continues, these are 4 ways that one can lose the path. If you, through desire, aversion, fear, or delusion, wander from the Dhamma, your mindfulness is lost. So that, again, that makes sense. And we talked a little bit about this last night, that the Buddha taught mindfulness in really one very specific way, and that is to hold in mind the principles of the Eightfold Path. Other aspects of mindfulness, and mindfulness has become another almost a modern religion today, and it's, in most cases, it's good to be mindful of what you're doing, but as far as what the Buddhists taught, mindfulness is rooted in concentration developed in shamatha vipassana meditation. And it is through that concentration, a developing but well-concentrated mind, that we're able to hold in mind, that's what mindfulness means, to hold in mind or to recollect when it's appropriate, each factor of the Eightfold Path, to integrate the Eightfold Path and not lose the way through appropriate mindfulness. The Buddha continues, there are 4 ways of not losing the way. One does not lose the way if one simply abandons desire and abandons aversion and abandons fear and abandons delusion. Now, the Buddha is speaking in a general way, but he's also speaking directly about the Dhamma, to not lose the way through desire, meaning that you want the Buddhist teachings to be different than they are. And when you look at modern Buddhism, what you see, what you can't help to observe, is all the adaptations, accommodations, and embellishments that have been made to an awakened human being's very simple and direct path, that have made it inaccessible and useful. It's just the end result is something quite different than awakening, as the Buddha describes awakening, and it is through that desire, that desire that the Dhamma be something different than it is rooted in wrong views, and those wrong views are expressed in that we want ourselves to be different than we are, and we want the world around us to be different than it is, rather than learning that everything is in a process of becoming, and to accept things as they are, because without the need for them to be any different, simply because that's what's occurring. And that's the real secret to developing a calm and peaceful mind. I don't want to get sidetracked from the Agati Sutta, but that's something that the Buddha references all the time, and that, of course, I talk about in my classes. One does not lose the way if one abandons aversion. That's the other side of desire or craving, is aversion. Aversion is simply another side of that same coin. We still want something to be different. We want ourselves to be different. One of the aspects of anatta, of mind rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, is a very subtle but pervasive self-loathing, or we're constantly trying to escape ourselves, or improve ourselves, or fix a broken self, rather than understand that it is only the way that we think. David brought up a very good point last night. Ultimately, this comes down to the way we think about ourselves in relation to the world. That's 3 marks of existence. When the way we think about ourselves in relation to the world is rooted in sensory desire, including the sensual need that I must always be satisfying myself in my own views, the end result is self-loathing, because we can never satisfy that ambiguous view that's rooted in ignorance. One does not lose the way if one abandons fear and abandons delusion. Fear and delusion, that initial fear is fear of annihilation, but it also has to do with association. Once we associate ourselves with different views and different ideologies rather than what is developed in the Eightfold Path, there's great fear of losing those connections, losing those associations, and losing these views that we've acquired that are ignorant of Four Noble Truths. And then the last, to simply abandon delusion, is to recognize that we are deluded initially, that we're lacking understanding, and because we're lacking understanding of Four Noble Truths, we act in a way, let me say it this way, that has created a quality of mind that is rooted in delusion, meaning that we don't understand the way things are in reality. That's the deluded thinking. The Buddha continues, through mindfulness of the Dhamma, you will not become lost. The simple instruction, by maintaining the integrity of the Eightfold Path, you cannot get lost. That's why it's called a path. That's why the Buddha referred to it as a path, and it continues to this way as an Eightfold Path. It allows us to walk the middle way between extreme wrong views. By walking the Eightfold Path, you will not become lost. The Buddha continues, if you abandon desire, aversion, fear, and delusion, you will remain mindful of the Dhamma, and you will not lose your way. Now, what's the problem? Why don't we abandon desire, aversion, fear, and delusion? Because it's familiar to us. We have defined ourselves through fear, through delusion, through aversion, and through desire. The things that I want, the things that I need to avoid, that we decide that those are required, rather than letting go of all of those conceptual applications rooted in wrong views, to simply develop an Eightfold Path. And by using the framework of the Eightfold Path, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation, we will not lose the way. And if we do not do that, we likely will lose the way. This is what an awakened human being taught 2,600 years ago. And it's just as relevant and just as significant today. And what I see from my vantage point as a Dhamma teacher is the very, very subtle but very powerful desire to continue to ignore ignorance. And so that the most debilitating example of that is coming across an awakened human being's teachings and then falling back into these subtle strategies that allow us to ignore even the Eightfold Path and then consider that we're somehow practicing what a Buddha taught. The Buddha taught a very simple and direct path. And that's the whole point of my talk today. And really, I guess I would say my teachings is to keep it focused on what the Buddha taught. The Buddha awakened to dependent origination that states from ignorance to 12 observable causative links, all manner of suffering arises. And so his first teaching was to teach the Four Noble Truths, to end that ignorance and to end suffering and end our own contributions to suffering in our lives. So that's today's talk. I hope you found benefit from this talk. And if you did, please consider a donation at becoming-buddha.com. I see Bodhi got himself into the picture as he usually does. So have a wonderful day. Peace.